Sharing time with Deputy Broome. I'm taking 10 minutes, Deputy Broome 5 and Deputy Wallace 5.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I want to begin by acknowledging, by applauding and thanking those individuals, families, organisations, communities and activists who continue to work for animal welfare, who work to expose the cruelty and the neglect that goes on in this country in relation to animals. And yes, there are positive measures in the Animal Welfare Bill, but we would not be having the debate tonight if that Act were working and all the measures were being implemented. So if we look at the facts, the National Animal Cruelty Helpline that was set up records over 53,000 calls in the first 3 years, with more than 16,500 this year, in the past year, including a range of animal issues, from neglect to health issues with chronic skin conditions, inflammation, untreated illnesses like cancer, living in appalling conditions with no access to food or water, being found in emaciated conditions. And these are cases that are coming from many counties in Ireland. Now, the ISPCA, they care for all animals, companion, wild, farm and animals used in entertainment, sport and research. But they have 8 uniformed inspectors covering 17 counties. So how serious are we about animal welfare with only 8? 8 cannot even cover what is in the legislation, so I believe we're paying lip service to animal welfare. However, those inspectors did initiate over 70 prosecutions, with 30 finalised in court. But even though the Animal Welfare Act allows for significant fines and imprisonment, the penalties imposed by the court are all at the lower level of the range and consequently derisory, and I think that speaks for itself. Now, to look at some particular examples, in a topical issue last year, I highlighted the matter of the abuse in puppy farms, and I gave the details in breach of the existing Dog Breeding Establishment Act. There were no upward limits, inspections were appointment with several weeks' notice. When improvement notices were given, the premises are invited to comply. A puppy farm passed by the local authority but had multiples of the permitted number of dogs, and those dogs living in absolute squalor. We have county managers being compelled into initiating enforcement procedures. So we don't see any urgency in ensuring improvements are carried out, and in the meantime, the animals continue to live in appalling conditions. A vet in a certain county inspected an unregistered dog breeding establishment, found the dogs in unacceptable conditions. They were seized. He recommended the owner be prosecuted, which did happen, and he was convicted. But while that case was pending, the same owner applied for a dog breeding licence, got it because the same vet granted the licence. He could have waited on the outcome. There's another example where an improvement notice was given to a facility. The enforcement was not followed up, and the facility took 2 years to comply, and the animals continued to live in those appalling conditions. I also highlighted the puppy farm in County Cavan, which was the subject of a documentary and which showed appalling abuse. And because the ISPCA were critical of Cavan County Council, we have the officials there and in Leitrim County Council asking that the ISPCA refrain from directly criticising them. Now, the ISPCA were working to ensure that the councils were enforcing the Dog Breeding Establishment Act and applying the existing guidelines. Another council had licensed a breeder for 300 dogs, despite that breeder not having appropriate facilities or planning permission. So surely the local authorities, the department, the vets and the Veterinary Council of Ireland should be on the same page as the ISPCA when it comes to animal welfare. Now, Minister English's reply that night, and I quote, was that the scope of existing guidelines needs to be enhanced as they are quite benign, representing a minimal standard that's no longer acceptable, particularly in view of recent issues that arose with some establishments. So a review of the guidelines for dog breeding establishments would begin. Now, in reply to a PQ question from Deputy Claire Daly and myself last June, Minister English said the public consultation process closed on the 1st of February 2017. He expected the findings in June 2017, and they would be considered without delay. This is October, and where are they? And I hope when the guidelines do come out that the next issue will be completely covered, and that's the disposal of dog waste. There are at least 73 registered puppy farms, so at least 30,000 dogs being produced yearly, and that's a lot of dog waste. Dog waste is linked with a number of diseases, and it's a serious threat to the environment, to the health and to livestock if it's not properly disposed of. The Food Safety Authority has various rules and guidelines about untreated organic material on an agricultural farm or agricultural land, but they need to look at the dog breeding establishments as well. Now, a very detailed submission on this is in with An Bord Pleanála on a particular planning application for a particular puppy farm, which had already been permitted by the local authority. So obviously the local authority are not paying much attention to the health issues of dog waste and EU directives on this. And then we come to the hares, and it's a total contradiction that under the Wildlife Act the hare is protected, but yet the Act also allows hare coursing, which we know is terrorising one animal by another. It's unnecessary cruelty from the netting process, the transportation of the hares, the handling of the hares, keeping them herded, and of course then the practice of blooding. And then we come to coursing trials, which are not administered by the National Parks and Wildlife Service, but they did attend a recent coursing trial, and they found the coursing club there planned to hold between 130 and 150 trials using 64 hares. Now, the hares are only supposed to be coursed once a day, and then they are released, so the maths do not add up there. Now, I prefer to see an end to live hare coursing because there is an alternative, but in the meantime there is a need for the coursing trials to be monitored. The National Parks and Wildlife Service, they should be informed of the location, the dates and the times, and if they don't have enough personnel to monitor them, then they should be banned. We believe also there is a strong lobby at the Minister at the moment to drop the condition that a hare would only be coursed once a day, and condition 20 of the licence to net hares is also not being complied with, namely that each single surviving hare is earmarked with a non-toxic dye, because we're reliably informed a certain hare trapper who goes to the release site to capture the hares just released and then goes around selling these hares to coursing clubs, and another hare trapper who keeps a supply of hares at his establishment to sell on to coursing clubs who might be short of hares. And then the other contradiction is greyhound owners, including those who are against coursing, have to register with the Irish Coursing Club if they want their greyhounds to take part in track racing. The coursing club is over 90% financed by the registration fees, but the majority of greyhounds don't take part in coursing, and the greyhound industry and greyhound welfare could do with some of that funding. Greyhounds can live for up to 14 years, but yet the lifespan for Irish greyhounds is 3 to 4 years. So thousands are put to sleep yearly, including at racetracks where sometimes injuries are not treated. We have cases of greyhounds being dumped with their ears burned to remove the markings which could identify the owner. And then the recently highlighted case of doping, and a really bizarre explanation from a trainer owner of how cocaine could be found in one of the dogs. I could give you a list of the prohibited substances that have been found in random sampling of greyhounds in the past 2 years, and a list of those trainers of those dogs who continue training. So what's needed is more out-of-competition testing, full publication of the tests, and if a Class A positive is found, the Irish Greyhound Board should inform the Gardaí and the Department of Agriculture. It is a state-funded industry. And then the other greyhounds. Over the last year, campaign groups, individuals and the media have been highlighting the fate of Irish greyhounds being exported to countries with poor or no animal welfare standards. Our greyhounds, they adapt well as family pets, but when they're of no use here, they are exported to horrific circumstances and cruel deaths, to be used in the dog meat trade, as live bait in fights between wild animals in so-called zoos in countries like China and Pakistan, India and South America. And they're also being exported through European countries and the US. So if we're serious about animal welfare, we have to ban exporting all greyhounds to any country other than the UK, with the exception of rescued greyhounds from established reputable centres in Ireland going to reputable adoption groups abroad. We need more accurate and up-to-date traceability of all Irish-born greyhounds from birth to death. And then the general live exports of our farm animals, which does involve long journeys, overcrowded conditions, deprivation of food and water, inadequate ventilation, rough handling, and they're going to countries with slaughter practices that are immensely cruel. And there is evidence for all of this available. We have other issues. We know that fox hunting continues. I accepted a petition this morning from a gentleman who had collected over 10,000 signatures against fox hunting. And whatever chance the fox might have in a hunt, he has absolutely no chance whatever in the cruel, barbaric practice of the digging out of foxes. Fur farming continues, albeit on a much smaller scale now in Ireland. But it's estimated that over 200,000 mink are killed for the remaining 3 fur farms in Ireland. I'm glad we have an amendment here on animals in circuses, which I will also support, because we know that there are animals in circuses and the circus is completely unsuitable for that animal. Badgers, we're still waiting on the rollout of the vaccine, which would eliminate the very cruel way they're treated. And then the recent Ballinasloe horse fair. Despite reduced numbers of people and animals there, the ISPCA were as busy as ever. 3 ponies, 3 donkeys and 10 dogs were removed, and it goes on and on. The legislation is worthless unless it's implemented, and the legislation that we have is not being implemented. And I don't know whether that's through indifference, whether it's through ignorance, whether it's through disinterest, allied with a lack of the adequate resources and personnel to ensure implementation.
Deputy O'Sullivan to conclude has 5 minutes.
Right. So dús ahantas agus buíochas de gach aine ghlach part san díspóireacht anocht. I really appreciate all the contributions tonight. The point is that we can't dispute the facts and the evidence of animal neglect and animal cruelty, because there are gaps in the legislation and because the legislation is not being fully implemented. And it doesn't help that there are 3 departments involved in animal issues. It doesn't help that there's no consistency in the way councils apply the DBE Act and guidelines and the Animal Welfare Act. For example, a breeder was found to have more than the specified number of dogs. Now, instead of the council prosecuting him, the council just upped the number of dogs that he could have. It doesn't help that there are repeated refusals by certain councils to release inspection records. And it doesn't help the levels of secrecy and the difficulties that animal welfare supporters have in getting information, including through FOIs, of inspections that have been carried out by local authorities. And when they do get that information, it can be very heavily redacted. If there's nothing to hide, the information should be readily available. And it doesn't help that there are authorities who choose to do nothing when cases of animal neglect and abuse are brought to their attention by individuals and groups, and then those authorities spend their time justifying inaction and they close ranks in order to protect their own. Now, we have many responsible, hard-working vets, include my own over in Fairview on that one, but there appears to be no one to follow up on those vets who are not enforcing the animal welfare legislation. And I have to ask, what is the role of the Veterinary Council of Ireland on the statutory obligations of their members? The VCI can undertake investigations if concerns are raised, and they could make the industry substantially better. Now, I had a look at the amendments, and the Fianna Fáil amendment sets out the theory in legislation to ensure highest standards and strict sanctioning regime for offenders. And the government amendment also mentions increased penalties, but that is not happening, as Deputy Connells has just pointed out there. We are way behind other countries. For example, the UK have increased sentencing for people convicted of animal cruelty, and in the US, animal cruelty is now a Class A felony, with the FBI tracking animal cruelty issues. Yes, the amendment about the line about live exports may have a veterinary health cert when they're leaving Ireland, but look at what happens to them en route and on arrival at destination. And there are evidence and facts to prove this. Yes, welfare checks are carried out, but the reports are not always available, as I said, and we don't see the follow-up. Yes, the 2.4 million, and it's good to hear you giving more to animal charities, but in 2017, 64 million was given to the greyhound and horse industry, and it's the animal welfare charities who have to deal with the fallout of unwanted dogs and horses. And Minister, you might clarify if the Cavan puppy farmer who kept whelping bitches and unborn pups in the tiny wooden crates that are illegal under the guidelines is on the working group reviewing the DBE guidelines. And you might also ask Cavan County Council who is representing them on the working group, because they refuse to disclose that information as to who it is. And then also, you could clarify, the self-confessed biggest puppy farmer in Europe who is still operating, even though a closure order was sought because of the appalling conditions in which he was keeping the animals. My understanding is he's still operating with no planning permission, but with the full knowledge of Offaly County Council, who won't issue enforcement proceedings. Now, if a person is neglected or abused or badly treated, that person has a voice, but animals don't have a voice. And so to the people in the gallery and others who can't be here tonight, only for you and others like you, Ireland's reputation on animal welfare would be much, much worse. So I thank you for your care, your passion, your commitment to expose and eliminate animal neglect and cruelty. The one positive tonight, is that we all agree that cruelty to animals is unacceptable and won't be tolerated. So I take that positive from tonight, and it is good to hear members talk about their love for animals, but we can't just rest there on the words and what is on paper, because there are too many documented cases of animal neglect and outright cruelty. And if we have so much in common, well, then we most certainly can make a difference on this matter. Thank you.
I'm obliged to put the question, and that's amendment number 2 in the name of the Minister. The question is that the amendment be made. It should the Tana Wawer Abadis Ta, it should the Tana Gunya Abadis Neil, Shilam Goal and Cash Richa. The division is postponed until the weekly division time on Thursday in accordance with Standing Order 72. Gormaigav Augustan Dail Eireann Manley Amara. Gormaigav.